As Carol's told, I'm mainly teaching at University of Latvia. I'm assistant professor and senior researcher there. And we met in summer school with Karolis last summer in Riga because, as Karolis told, I represent also NGO. And this NGO Health Projects for Latvia, we sometimes organize events for students, and one of our main aims is promotion of rational use of medicines, which includes also doctors and doctors' relationships with pharmaceutical industry. And we do some research in this field and also try to empower students and medical professionals with some knowledge about this topic. And in European level, as Carol is told, NGO Health Action International in global level too is working on this topic. So these are different organizations I'm belonging to. And today, I hope we will have quite informal conversation because I'm not at my job here, and you are here in the afternoon. So I really would like to encourage you, if you have any questions or comments during my speech, please ask, because it will be much more productive if you will ask me, and I will respond to you. And my colleague Vita from NGO Health Projects for Latvia also is here. She works also a lot with students, so we will try to respond to your questions and comments. But I will start with some general introduction to this topic. I guess you can imagine what it is about and what the problem is, but still, I will speak about several problems about what is pharmaceutical promotion, what is impact of pharmaceutical promotion, how promotional activities are regulated, and I will show some case studies, including some results from a survey we did with, we surveyed attitudes and attitudes of students in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia towards pharmaceutical industry and students' exposure to pharmaceutical industry. So what is pharmaceutical promotion? That's the starting question. And if we look at R&D process, and I'm sure you know what R&D process is, pharmaceutical promotion comes in at the end of this process. So the start is development of drugs, research in laboratory, research in laboratory animals, then human studies, and the end phase is marketing, so drug fostering and evolution, including post-marketing studies, and that's the point where doctors and also students meet pharmaceutical representatives. And not only meet pharmaceutical representatives, you see also pharmaceutical advertisements in journals. In Latvia, sometimes in older books, there are advertisements, medicines advertisements, even in students' textbooks. I don't know about Lithuania, but Estonians said they have sometimes the same problem. So, definition of pharmaceutical promotion, it's included in WHO ethical criteria for medicinal drug promotion. It says promotion refers to all informational and persuasive activities by manufacturers and distributors, the effect of which is to induce the prescription, supply, purchase, and or use of medicinal drugs. So, any activity, and I will show the list of possible activities, but you are mainly medical students, as I understood. So I'm quite sure you already have met pharmaceutical industry, and you will meet pharmaceutical industry many, many times, and in many, many forms. And the problem is that we just discussed with Carol is how much these topics about communication with pharmaceutical industry and relationships with pharmaceutical industry are introduced in the, during your studies. And it's not often, especially in Eastern Europe, you are not taught how to speak with pharmaceutical representatives. Be sure they are taught how to speak with you very heavily. That's the sad part, I would say, because the education training of pharmaceutical representatives is mainly, what do you think, what training they get mainly? What are those subjects, what they study or are trained in?
Communications?
Absolutely, psychology, communications. Yeah, there are specific materials about types of doctors, how to approach each type of doctor. They are trained in that much more than in I don't know, pharmacy, for example. So they are prepared. You are not prepared. That's the problem. This is a citation from Prescrire. I will show and explain what Prescrire is in a couple of slides, but this is a French organization of physicians, NGO, and they do a lot with rational use of medicines, and they say the dominant business model of the pharmaceutical sector is based on the massive promotion of drugs that often do not represent any significant therapeutic advance. So what is Prescrire? And you can find in internet, that's a wonderful web page. It's independent organization of physicians in France, but they have a part of their web page in English too, so you see the address, web address. One of the things they do, they classify all the newly registered drugs, new drugs, every year. And they put these drugs in categories you see here. The categories are Bravo. The product is a major therapeutic advance in an area where previously no treatment was available. A real advance offers an advantage, possibly helpful, nothing new, judgment reserved, not acceptable. Your guess, how many drugs? And these are professionals from pharmaceutical sector, I don't know, professors, doctors who do this review and classify drugs. How many drugs are every year? How many percent are in this Bravo part? 1%, okay.
I have a question, is it only generic drugs, original drugs, or all? All.
Mm-hmm. Newly registered drugs, new drugs. So, but if they are newly registered, then of course, yeah, they are newly developed, and 1% you said. You see, 2000 to 2014, number of drugs were 1,432. Bravo is 0. Real advance is 2%. Offers an advantage 7%, possibly helpful 20%. Nothing new is 51%, which means there's a title for this group of drugs. They are sometimes called Me Too drugs. So there are already drugs like this in the market, and a new drug is developed, Me Too drug. So more than half. Then non-acceptable 14%, judgment reserved 6%. So you can find every year a new list of drugs on this webpage. It's very useful, also in English, just to check what's going on. So if you look at this diagram, you can imagine that it's very important to advertise new drugs, especially those which are nothing new. And a lot of effort is put into advertising these drugs. And that's understandable, because if you look at business ethics, then from point of view of business ethics, the main aim of pharmaceutical companies is to make money for their owners. So that's from point of view of business ethics. But medical devices and medicines are very specific type of things, isn't it? It is. Because many of these new drugs, they are life-saving for people, for example. And they might be, or they are not needed for people. Do you know what polypharmacy is? You can guess. It's easy. Polypharmacy.
When patients take several drugs?
Absolutely. Yeah, there are different classifications. Some say 5 at the same time, or 7. It's very characteristic for senior patients. Especially if they go to the pharmacy by themselves some non-prescription drugs, and then they get from different specialists more drugs. And if there is heavy advertisement from pharmaceutical industry, it can promote also polypharmacy. That's only one of the problems which can be. So promotional activities, if you think about all possible promotional activities done by pharmaceutical industry, there are different types. There is advertising to public, and in European Union, only non-prescription drugs can be advertised to the public, as you know. In which countries prescription drugs are advertised to the public? United States, yeah, and New Zealand, yeah. Which means there are even more problems with that. Imagine if you have a patient who has seen a new prescription drug in the television, and research shows that it really can influence patients, and then they go to the doctor and ask for a prescription for this specific drug. So we are lucky we are in the European Union, and at least that problem is not our problem. Except those cases when prescription drugs are advertised illegally, which happens sometimes. Sometimes industry goes to patient organizations and do illegal advertising of drugs. So, but advertising to public is the smallest part. Biggest part, and we are especially interested in this part, is advertising to professionals. So advertisements of medicines, as I told you, will see them in journals or in conferences. When you go to the conference, you know, before the conference, there will be a big room. You know that. A big room with many advertisements. Sure, and you will go through, you will get what? You will get pens, you will get, yeah, nice things, sure. Then the second, and second is funding for continuing medical education and conferences. And it's so that medical students very often think that it's not advertising. But if you look at your regulation and at regulation in Latvia, I mean legal regulation, you will see that funding for medical continuing medical education and conferences goes into it's under the advertising law, because it is advertising. If you go if pharmaceutical company pays you for a nice conference. Usually, they will also organize a dinner in the evening, and you will go with some representative who will nicely speak with you. He will know many things about your family and private life. Yeah, of course it works that way. It's because to make friends with people is one of the best ways how to advertise. Honoraria for lectures and services, which is mostly about keynotes persons, very prominent professors. When you will be prominent professors, then you will be invited to speak for industry and get honoraria for that. Visits by pharmaceutical reps. I don't know how it's regulated in Lithuania in practice, but in Latvia, unfortunately, it's written in the law that pharmaceutical reps cannot come in working time to meet doctors when they meet their patients. But it's very often broken, this rule. I guess it's the same here. Yeah, they are coming and going. And if we speak about good policy, we did a research about hospital policies in Latvia, how it's regulated. And unfortunately, only one hospital at that time started to develop specific policies. But in Western countries, especially at university hospitals, it might be so that it's either completely prohibited to meet with pharmaceutical representatives at a hospital, or it's very strictly regulated. For example, pharmaceutical representatives can move in the territory of the hospital only with somebody from the hospital. They wear a sign, and yeah, but or at least they may meet with doctors only in groups, like doctors are in group like you, and not individually. Why it's better? No personal contact, that's one. Yeah, you don't speak eye to eye. But there are also many other good things why it's better to meet in group. More questions, more critical thinking. You see what your colleagues say and how they criticize. Okay, gifts. You will get also gifts if you haven't got already. Free drug samples, which is, I think we have decided that in our economical situation, it's one of the most innocent parts of all this advertising process, because at least in Latvia, it's very often used for social aims, like patients who cannot afford medicines, they get them, but still, it influences doctors, because if you see the label very often, you remember it, you memorize it, you memorize the name, brand of yeah. Funding for development of clinical guidelines. I don't know about Lithuania, maybe you know how clinical guidelines are funded. Usually clinical guidelines are developed by medical associations, like Association of Gastroenterologists. But in Latvia, there is no state funding for that. And it's quite often funded by pharmaceutical industry. Not directly, but for example, printing of guidelines is funded by industry. Why it's good or why it's maybe not so good. I will show some research studies in a couple of slides, but this is one particular example from Prescreen again, and this was a very controversial case. This medicine, Tovias, was very heavily advertised. It was introduced for treatment of patients with overactive bladder, and what was done? The analysis was done about this medicine, which was really heavily advertised, and the analysis showed that there are benefits from this drug. Which is about 1 out of 10 women became continent using this medicine. It's about urinary incontinence. And about 1 out of 10 women improved their symptoms using this medicine. That's great. But if you look at side effects, and remember, there are many studies that showing that pharmaceutical representatives are very, very cautious to mention side effects. There are studies saying that they don't mention, they must, but they don't very often. And if you look at side effects, then you see that about 2 out of 10 women had dry mouth using this medicine. Less than 1 out of 10 women had constipation using this medicine. Less than 1 out of 10 women had dry eyes using this medicine. But we can go further and ask, are there alternative options for treating this condition? And if you look of other options like non-drug treatments, which means lifestyle changes, bladder training, in this case, 4 out of 10 women improved their symptoms using bladder control exercises. So there is alternative. If you rely as professionals mainly on pharmaceutical representatives to get information, which information you will get? Do you believe that pharmaceutical representative will come and tell you about this wonderful lifestyle change? No, sure. You will get this very positive information that 1 out of 10 will improve with the drug. The question is where to get the information, and the problem at least in Latvia, we don't have research data about Lithuania, but in Latvia, and we are not far away, I would say. I don't think we are very different in medical healthcare system. In Latvia, really many doctors rely on pharmaceutical representatives as the main source of information. I don't know, maybe you have completely different experience. Of course, there are very critical doctors. There are some doctors who say, I will never accept pharmaceutical representative in my office. That's it. There will be moderate doctors who say, okay, they come, they go, I don't care what they say. But it still leaves influence. And there will be doctors who will say, yes, they bring me very good information, I rely on them, and that's the main source of information. Can you imagine why doctors so heavily rely on this information? What are the reasons?
Because they don't have to do this for themselves.
Sure. It takes time. It takes time. And the second problem, at least in Latvia, is doctors have problems to read in English. Because you can find a lot of information in English. There are many independent sites about about medicines, etc. Or you can read many articles in PubMed. It's all available now. But the problem is time, language. Especially senior doctors, sometimes they don't speak English and they don't read English. Any other problems? Why? Time, language problems. Statistics. If a doctor would like to read scientific articles, you need quite a good understanding of statistics. And that's why in many European countries, there was a research about medical students in European countries, what kind of knowledge students lack after finishing studies. And statistics was one of the I can imagine you know the problem. Because if you are very good in statistics, you are powerful, really. Because nowadays you have access to all possible studies, reviews, etc., etc., and you can read and judge by yourself. Otherwise, doctors should rely on reps, pharmaceutical representatives, and of course, I wouldn't say the information they bring is incorrect, but it is shaped in a certain way. Yeah. Okay. Like this, you will get correct information about benefits, but you will not get this information. So what is the impact of pharmaceutical promotion? If we speak about rational use of medicines, which means what? What is rational use of medicines? You can imagine, I'm sure you know what it means.
Not prescribing more than needed.
Yeah, the correct amount.
Use when it needed.
When it needed. What else?
In the amounts.
Yeah, sure.
Take in mind interactions. Like take drug interactions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. For the best price, by the way. which is a big problem. We could, I don't know, discuss it. I think for several hours the current problems with drug prices in Europe and world. So to foster rational use of medicines, physicians have to be independent, informed, which means evidence-based medicine, and act solely in the interests of the patient. These are three components to foster rational use of medicine. And the question is how to be independent, how to be informed, and how to act in the interest of the patient. And the interest of the patient, it brings with this concept of conflict of interest. Do you have any kind of education about conflict of interest? I'm quite sure you have somewhere in the curriculum, but what kinds of conflicts of interest doctors might have in their practice?
Fundings for the research?
Yeah, sure. Sometimes it might be conflict, especially if a doctor involves his own patients in the research, then he takes two roles. He is a doctor and a researcher at the same time. And these two activities have different aims, because aim of treatment is benefit of individual patient. What's the aim of research? Very good aim, it's development of new drug and new knowledge, which is fantastic aim, but it's not about individual patient. Imagine placebo-controlled trial. In placebo-controlled trial, there will be group of patients which will not get active ingredient, and it will be not in. So there is conflict of interest if a doctor is both researcher and physician. Any other conflicts of interest? Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. And it will be, if you are developing guidelines, in many countries you will be asked to declare your conflicts of interest. And mainly it's about your collaboration with industry in that case. Because if you have a very good relationship with industry, maybe your interest will be to promote interests of the industry also. Sometimes doctors are owners of some parts in pharmaceutical companies, and it's also conflict of interest. So possible negative impact of promotion might be conflict of interest. If you like very much your pharmaceutical representative, then it might build a conflict of interest. In wild 90s, not now, but in wild 90s, there were practices where doctors were paid for each prescription, for example, for a particular drug. I don't know whether you have heard that. Or you collect number of prescriptions you have done, and then you get, it was a real scandal in Latvia, you get, for example, travel to somewhere for I don't know, like you go to the supermarket and you got those small stickers. Yeah, that was practiced in 90s, and you can imagine it is conflict of interest in that case. One-sided information is also negative impact of promotion, because as I told, it's not incorrect, this information, but it's one-sided, and it's less than optimal treatment choices. When we did a research study in Latvia about collaboration with pharmaceutical industry, a very popular phrase said by doctors was that even if we are prescribing, for example, brand names instead of generics in some situations, it's not harming patients, it's maybe just a bigger amount of money they pay. I can imagine that for some senior patients, even €1 or €2 might be, yeah, it might be big harm, because maybe it's the money they can survive for 2 days. So it's also less than optimal choice of treatment. Mike Rawlings, UK National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, he says, few doctors accept that they themselves have been corrupted. And I will show some research results in a minute. Most doctors believe that they are quite untouched by the seductive ways of industry marketing men and women. that they are uninfluenced by the promotional propaganda they receive, that they can enjoy a company's generosity in the form of gifts and hospitality without prescribing its products. The degree to which the profession, mainly composed of honorable and decent people, can practice such self-deceit is quite extraordinary. No drug company gives away its shareholders' money in an act of disinterested generosity. If a big, rich company pays a big money to somebody, they expect something back. This was a very interesting study. The doctors were asked, residents, internal medicine residents, were asked how much influence do sales representatives have on your prescribing. 1% said a lot, 38 a little, 61 said none. I guess if I would ask you, you maybe would say the same about yourself. But then the second question was asked. And the second question was, how much influence do sales representatives have on your colleagues? What will be the results? What do you think? Different. In what sense? I have it in the next slide. What could I think? And it's very humane, I would say. They will say that. Yeah, that's, yeah, the same residents, they say a lot. Yeah. So the problem is what in this case? The name of this problem is illusion of unique invulnerability. Which means, but it's not the only case when it's shown. In many situations, we think that we are exception. I cannot be influenced by advertising. I cannot be influenced, but other people, they of course are influenced. The problem is that that there is this big gap between all of us think that we are invulnerable, but others are. But it somehow doesn't fit together. I would say that advertisement influences each of us. The question is how much we allow us to be exposed to this advertisement. So when does exposure to the pharmaceutical promotion start? That's one question. It starts early. It starts during your studies. I will show this data from our survey with students in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And this survey also shows that you have met pharmaceutical industry. At the same time, as we discussed at the beginning, most students don't obtain adequate education on how to critically appraise pharmaceutical promotion. You are not educated how to deal with that. And for example, 85.2% of medical students in France, and the group was big, it was more than 2,000 students, reported feeling to be inadequately educated about conflicts of interest arising from interactions with the pharmaceutical industry. So French students say there's lack of education in this field. So this is the study for this data. There are recently a lot of publications about influence of pharmaceutical advertising. I will show several other studies, but empirical evidence shows that even a pen influences you in different ways. You remember the title. You remember the. It's easier if you see the name very often. You just remember it. You memorize it. If you have very good memories from a conference you have been sponsored by the industry, maybe you will feel this feeling of reciprocity. Do you know what reciprocity means? That's nice English word. In Latvian, we don't have such a nice word. Reciprocity, which means if somebody gives you something, you feel this obligation to give something back. It works in social life very, very well. If you have a nice colleague or friend and he gives you a small present for a birthday, you will feel that when he or she will have a birthday, you will give a chocolate to him, maybe. Isn't it so? It's so. There are a million of studies showing that reciprocity works, and gifts have a very specific meaning in our societies. So it's a bit naive to think that you can take gifts and not to be reciprocative. It's really, really problematic. What you see here, it's a title from US, because in US, ProPublica, they publish already for several years data about amount of money given by pharmaceutical industry to doctors, and it's publicly available. You can search your family doctor in US, just write a name in search and get from which companies how much money he or she gets. By the way, publicly available data about payments of pharmaceutical industry must be available also in Lithuania. According to industry self-regulation. In Latvia, we do have double regulation. We have state regulation and also self-regulation of industry. So, and actually we managed to get to the result that this year it's more or less searchable. So you can find this information about doctors also in Latvia. Is it necessary? It's very controversial. If we ask doctors, medical doctors or students, this question, should the information about payments from industry be available and transparent? How much money doctors get from pharmaceutical industry, do you know? Can you imagine? What might be record in UK? Last year there were big publications about the best paid doctor in UK. Per year, how much money would you say can a good doctor get from pharmaceutical industry? 200,000. 200,000. Okay, it was 100,000, almost 100,000. Yeah. In Latvia, the record was. But it's, of course, it's not all sum, but at least declared or transparent. It was.
Well, we analyzed the data of industry payments for doctors to go to the conference.
Yeah, it's only about conferences.
Yes, and the biggest amount was an oncologist, and she, I think, received something about 20,000. Well, not that she received, but the amount.
Was spent, yeah, for her travel.
By different companies. I think she went like 10 times a year to conferences and congresses.
But there are, of course, many other ways how to. Is transparency needed in this field?
Would you be interested to check on your family doctor or your cardiologist?
And of course, there are also more and less problematic fields in medicine. There are fields where industry puts a lot of money, and you can guess which fields those are. Oncology is one, sure, but there are several more. Sorry? Cardiology, you know the field. One more. Oncology, cardiology. Neurology, yeah, neurology was. Sorry? Psychiatry, not so much, but there is one more. You named almost all very, very well paid. Gastroenterology, no, that's yes, but not the yeah. No, endocrinology. Orthopedics will be, by the way, the problem is that this is, transparency refers only to medicines, but orthopedics will be about medical devices. And medical devices is completely dark field. It's not transparent at all, but they also pay a lot of money to doctors. But oncology, cardiology, endocrinology, yeah, neurology, those are the fields where the most money, where you should go, maybe. These are only some studies about influence. As you see, the first one is, do drug samples influence resident prescribing behavior? Yes, it influences. Or effect of drug sample availability on physician prescribing behavior. So the research shows it makes an influence. Contact between doctors and the pharmaceutical industry, their perceptions and the effects of prescribing habits. There are effects on prescribing habits. Next one, impact of pharmaceutical representative visits on GPs' drug preferences. There is impact on preferences. Effect of financial relationships on the behaviors of healthcare professionals, a review of the evidence. So there is evidence that it influences. That's it. It's proved. That's the more contacts doctors have with pharmaceutical industry, the more money they get, the more influence there is. Now I will show you this, some data from the survey we did with Lithuanian Medical Student Association. It was done in December 2016. Total number of respondents was 918. So quite similar numbers, 223 from Latvia, 389 from Lithuania, 306 from Estonia. Yeah, age, minimum, maximum, mean was 23.28. Much more women than men, unfortunately. So 65% medical students, 18% pharmaceutical students, 15% nursing students. There were some smaller groups which are not showed here. So the first group of questions was about exposure. Are you exposed to pharmaceutical industry during your studies? And those numbers which are in bold, they show that there is statistically significant difference in numbers. So you can see that in Estonia, less students have participated in educational event aimed at students with a lecture from pharmaceutical representative outside the study course. So it's more popular in Lithuania and Latvia. So you come to the event like this one, but I'm not from industry, but you meet person from industry here. Second is participated in educational event as a part of the university course. Means pharmaceutical industry, it's quite similar in all countries. Participated in conferences or meetings for healthcare providers, also sponsored by industry. It's much more in Latvia and less in Estonia. Lithuania is in the middle. Had listened to presentations about medicines or devices by pharmaceutical representatives. So again, Latvia is in the first place, but it's not good this time, I would say. And Lithuania and Estonia is almost at the same level. Have participated in a social event like dinner, sports event sponsored by pharmaceutical industry. So more in Estonia. During the last year, participated in the events 1 to 5 times, almost similar in all countries. Teaching staff uses educational materials with logos or advertisements of pharmaceutical companies. Latvia is the first, again. You are more like Estonia. Accepted free lunch, food, coffee, sweets. Unfortunately, Latvia is again in the first place. So there are more information about accepting of gifts. Again, Latvia has the biggest number, but and Lithuania is the best. Here you see, accepted a gift of value more than 10 euros from pharmaceutical representatives. So they don't give that gifts to the students, so you are not worth it yet. Accepted the textbook from pharmaceutical representative. Latvia is in the first place. I don't know why, but historically in Latvia, pharmaceutical companies are most involved with textbooks for students, and that's very bad, I think. When you in lectures, do all professors use international non-branded names of medicines? Yeah, is it so? Or do they sometimes use branded names of medicines? Rarely, but they do.
Well, we're still, the majority of us are in the preclinical studies, so we're just learning about the general
That's great, because of course it's a general rule that in your study process you should learn non-branded names of medicines, but unfortunately it's not the case always. Yeah. But every time you memorize the brand name, it means you will work for a certain company. It is. It's also influences. Yeah.
They usually write normal chemical name of the verb and also a brand name. So to memorize which drug you should give administer to a patient. And I know some students from Turkey. They know drugs only by brand name.
Yeah.
They are asking me to know this name, this drug, and I say, no, I don't really have to know about the chemical.
But it depends from country to country. But you mean the students here, Turkish students, Erasmus students? It depends from country to country. And on the one hand, we are from Europe, and we have quite a good regulation. If we compare to, I don't know, Latin America, Africa, or Asia, we have strong regulations, and it's very good. And as we see in some countries, it's worse. On the other hand, we can strive to be even better and to achieve this model where only chemical names are used in the teaching process. It would be very important, really. Because, as I said, every brand name also is advertising you get. And you memorize brand name, and
Because it's easier to memorize.
it is easier. They are made to memorize. They have nice names, yeah. And chemical names are sometimes quite. Our doctors, when we do research, sometimes they say it's impossible to memorize chemical names of drugs, but that's funny, of course. Of course, you can memorize, and yeah. Okay, you can take a look at other data, but the case is students in Baltic countries, as you see, have contact with pharmaceutical industry. Should this contact be? I would say, from my point of view, the later the better. We should do all possible, and I will show some examples from student organizations, what student organizations can do in this field. But I would say the later you contact pharmaceutical industry, the better, because it's all about influencing you. And these are statements students agree or rather agree. This percentage is, so percentage of students who agree or rather agree to the statement. So pharmaceutical industry provides objective, reliable and high quality information about medicines and medical devices. 59% in Latvia, 70% in Lithuania, 57% in Estonia. Lithuanians tend to believe that it's high quality information. Be careful with that. It's correct information, but it's one-sided information. And in the world where a lot of information is accessible, to rely on information given by pharmaceutical industry, it's a bit dangerous. Second statement, pharmaceutical and medical device companies should be seen as equal partners in healthcare system along with patients, healthcare providers and government institutions. So Estonians, as you see, are less keen they are more skeptical about the pharmaceutical industry. Actually, in this survey, Estonians, in many things, they are different as Lithuanians or Latvians. Latvians are worse in some situations, as you see, but there are differences between countries. I don't know why. Do you have any guesses why? Because we are still writing the article, you can help with interpretations. Why there is difference between Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia in this field?
Maybe doctors living there.
Doctors, which is true, by the way. Salaries for doctors in Estonia are better, yeah, sure. And of course, it might influence doctors in that sense that they don't need so much.
I think this is one of the biggest
I would say, I guess, I will contact Estonian colleagues, but I guess that they have different curriculum. Yeah, they have more these questions in the curriculum, and that's because they are very closely connected with Finnish educational system, and Finnish medical education has very long history of these topics in the curriculum. So, in my view, improving curriculum, including these topics in teaching medical students would really improve the situation. Look at this, pharmaceutical and medical device companies should participate in the education of students at universities. I would say 0, but Estonians, 39% of Estonians agree, or rather agree, but in Lithuania and Latvia it's 68%. Universities should promote financial collaboration between pharmaceutical and medical device companies and faculty. Yeah, maybe in some research projects, but yeah, and it's quite similar, the answers. I have enough information, knowledge on how to ethically interact with pharmaceutical and medical device companies, and this is interesting. I would say, here you see that only 32% of Estonian students say, yes, I do have, and Latvians are very proud with their knowledge. Lithuanians are in the middle. And I would say that this shows that, that maybe there are problems in different fields, other fields, because I guess that Lithuanians are not so sure about themselves because they know more. The more you know, it's Socrates, you know. you should know that you don't know. And I guess that more Estonians know that they don't know about influencing techniques, about different things in collaboration with pharmaceutical industry. So you can see the tendencies in Baltic states and how it works. So, regulation of promotional activities, but maybe, yeah, I will go shortly through this. Do you know how it's regulated in your country? How promotional activity, okay, another question. Do you know how promotional activities are regulated at the university here? Do you have any regulation? No. Who knows? Okay, should they be regulated? Of course, yeah, okay. What I can guess, in Lithuania you have the same international standards, like I showed you WHO ethical criteria for medical drug promotion. It's quite old, 1988. You and we have EU regulations like Directive 2001, which regulates promotion of medicines, and absolutely, I'm sure that to Lithuania applies self-regulation of European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. So we have quite a similar regulation. The problem is, I would say that sometimes regulation is even not bad, it's quite good, but it's not implemented as necessary. So in US, the main act regulating pharmaceutical promotion is Sunshine Act. Why it's called Sunshine Act? Approximately, to shed the light, and then you can see how it looks. It becomes transparent, and you can see how it looks. And this is the web page developed by ProPublica, which is called Dollars for Docs. I mentioned this web page. Has your doctor received drug or device company money? You can put in the doctor's name, put in choose the state, and it will show which companies have paid to the doctor. You are skeptical, aren't you?
No, I should check all the doctors I know.
In US. Again, should we say that no doctor should never get money from pharmaceutical company? No, I think it's reality the collaboration will be. Should it be transparent? For sure. I'm absolutely sure it must be transparent and visible. I don't know, should it be regulated? Yes, the amount maybe should be regulated. There are also so-called Sunshine Acts, and this title Sunshine Act is used also to name other regulatory acts also in Europe, in Slovakia, in France, in Portugal, and here we are proud in Latvia. There are legal regulations requiring transparency, at least in some fields of payments from industry to doctors. And this self-regulation, it's mainly FPA code, European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. You can find this regulation in Lithuanian for sure for your branch of FPA. And but there are several problems with this code because it allows a physician to refuse to be named. His name may be not published in under this regulation. Our legal regulation in Latvia requires the name to be published. This self-regulation allows a doctor to refuse to publish his name. So you get I don't know how much money this company have paid to the doctors, but some doctors are not named. And another thing is this self-regulation applies only to members of FPA, which are big companies like, I don't know, Merck is the big innovative companies, but there are many other companies which are not members of this. And of course, under self-regulation, there are also institutional and organizational policies. For example, hospitals, professional organizations of physicians and patient organizations who also develop rules how they will interact with pharmaceutical companies. And now to the case study I love. I always love this case study, and this is about American Medical Student Association. And this is a quite long story, but I hope it will somehow influence you and inspire you. The story starts in 2002 when Association of American Medical Colleges released policy recommendations regarding institutional conflicts of interest. So it's like, I don't know, Lithuanian medical college associations. You have 2 medical schools in Lithuania, so both medical schools would decide, or maybe you have smaller colleges also, would decide that they will regulate collaboration with industry. But 4 years later, these policy recommendations had only been implemented by 38% of US medical colleges. That was the fact, which you can imagine. We have, in Latvia, we have many cases where you develop fantastic guidelines, fantastic rules, and then they are not implemented. This fact that policy recommendations are not implemented was discovered by American medical student associations, and students went angry. And when students go angry, you know what it means, they started to act. And what they did, they developed a scorecard. And you can go to the web page of AMSA now, and you will find this scorecard. It still is used every year, which means ranking of US medical school policies on pharmaceutical company access and influence. So students developed this scorecard with 14 points, how they will evaluate each school regarding their policies towards pharmaceutical industry. Because students decided that that's very important for them. They decided that they would like to study at medical school where relationships with pharmaceutical industry are very strongly regulated. And it was based on evaluation of conflict of COE means conflict of interest policies and curricula. Methodology, how they do it every year, is it's in-depth assessment of individual policies that govern industry interaction between students, faculty, and the pharmaceutical and medical device industries. And they give grades to each section in this scorecard. I think that's very pleasurable to grade your school instead of school grading you. And they rate in each of the domains. There are 14 domains. I will show you them using the following general format. 3 is model policy, very good. 2 is good progress toward model policy. 1 is policy is absent or unlikely to have substantial effect on behavior. And you know that in US they use letter grades. A is the best. And they also applied these letter grades to each of medical school to assess schools' performance in 14 potential areas of conflict of interest. So A is the best grade and F is the worst. Policy domains, they evaluate 14 domains, like gifts from industry, meals, industry-sponsored promotional speaking relationships, industry support to continuing medical education, and think about your school, about your medical school. Attendance of industry-sponsored promotional events, industry-funded scholarships and awards, ghostwriting. What is ghostwriting? And honorary authorship. So what this domain means, they evaluate whether there is a policy regulating ghostwriting and honorary authorship. Ghostwriting.
It's like, for example, key opinion leader writes somebody writes
I guess you attended summer school. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it means that a company writes an article about research done by company, but they invite very famous professor to put his name on this article, ghostwriting. And the ghost author is paid for that. And here the question is, does medical schools policy regulate this? Honorary authorship it's very popular in Latvia, not only in papers written by pharmaceutical industry, it's in general very popular. Honorary authorship, you know, the last author in the article very often is the leader of the laboratory or something like that. He really, very often he or she doesn't correspond to all authorship criteria. And there are authorship criteria. We could have one more lecture about authorship questions. Okay, consulting and advising relationships, access of pharmaceutical sales representatives. Are access of sales representatives regulated in this building in any way? Access of medical device representatives, conflict of interest disclosure. By the way, in many Western universities, it's common that when a a professor starts a lecture, he or she starts with a slide with conflict of interest declaration. Or in many conferences, I guess you have seen that the first slide is conflict of interest disclosure, or at least does your medical school at least once a year ask professors to submit conflict of interest declaration? Not a case at my university, no. It should be. Existence of an adequate conflict of interest medical school curriculum, that's the question. Is it implemented, involved in the curriculum? Do you have lectures about this? Extension of conflict of interest policies to adjunct courtesy faculty and affiliated hospitals and clinics, enforcement and sanctions of policies. This is 2016. Before I came here, I put this new slide. You can see this is the start of the list, but the list is very long. You can go to the page and look. The first is Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at the University of Buffalo. And you see almost in all domains they have model policies, and in gifts and meals it's good, so good. University of Chicago Division of the Biological Sciences, the Pritzker School of Medicine, they also got A. If we go into this, what is required from a policy, you can see that if they say about gifts, it means that there will be 3 points if all gifts funded by industry are prohibited regardless of nature of value or value. 2 points if gifts allowed but only if value is less than $10, or if the gifts are limited to educational items for physicians such as textbooks. 1 gifts allowed of value about $10 and no restrictions specified. And background is that numerous published studies demonstrated small and large gifts play a role in influencing prescribing decisions. Meals. Have you had any meal from pharmaceutical industry? Ever?
Do your professors have meals?
But some are. For example, in Germany, there is a fantastic physicians organization. German physicians have organization in German, Meine Essen zahle ich selbst, which means I pay my food by myself, which is organization where physicians are. Yeah, they are against influence of pharmaceutical industry. By the way, around the world, there are quite many organizations and physician organizations working on these questions. That's I don't know about Lithuania. So meals, you see the background for meals, disclosure. Disclosure is an important component of conflict of interest policies. Faculty should be transparent about any financial relationships that could potentially influence their clinical and educational duties. And the strongest policy is if policy requires both of the following types of disclosure: internal disclosure to the institution and disclosure to trainees' audiences. So I have no conflict of interest. Curriculum, conflict of interest curriculum. The best evaluation if conflict of interest curriculum is required for medical students, it must reflect and cover most of the curricular content and objectives in the AMSA standards. Do Lithuanian Medical Student Association have standard about conflict of interest education? Americans have. Your colleagues there have. Imagine LIMSA standard for conflict of interest declaration. Access of sales reps. The highest standard is pharmaceutical sales representatives are not allowed access to any faculty or trainees in academic medical centers or affiliated clinical entities. However, faculty may invite other industry scientists who are not acting as sales representatives for specific discussions that do not involve marketing of a specific product. That's the strongest policy. And enforcement and sanctions, which was introduced in 2014. It's a perfect score requires general oversight to ensure compliance with policies and sanctions for non-compliance. About impact, because I guess that it's very important for student organizations to have certain impact. In 2007, AMSA found that only 21 out of 150 medical schools had adequate policies. Harvard Medical School has launched a review of its ethics policies under pressure from students there who thought that pharmaceutical industry's influence has become too pervasive. And I will show some pictures from Harvard. That was very, very influential case where students really did the change, and that the F that Harvard received on AMSAs was because they had what they call long-standing institution policies that were not written down anywhere. So, but if you compare 2007 and 2014, in 2014 of 161 US medical schools, 25 received A's, 83 B's, 26 C's, and only 26 incomplete, to compare with only 21 with policies in 2007. And that was success of student organization. I would say great. And about pictures, this is Harvard Medical student protesting the schools flunking grade. I like the slogan, I don't want an F in anatomy or on the AMSA scorecard. And yeah, and that's my question here. If your university is evaluated according to these criteria, what will be the grade? What do you think? But this is mainly about policies. This is and what policy means. Policy means written document. Why written document is necessary? Because it shows that the university recognizes the problem. The university says there are conflicts of interest in the world and in medical. Yeah. Yeah, but also implementation also is evaluated. So and implemented. Policies are developed and implemented, and then you will get a very good score on this score. I don't know. Is it a problem for you at all? I can ask the question from the survey. Do you have enough knowledge about influence of pharmaceutical industry? No. Great. Yeah. But knowledge is not enough. It's very important to have this framework for regulating influence of pharmaceutical industry at the university, and students have really a say here. Really, if students start protest like it was in Harvard, then something changes. I don't know, maybe it's not your priority here, but if you think about next generations of students, then maybe it would be very, very important to start to change something, to recognize that there might be a problem, and to set the standard, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. The problem is that even medical doctors very often don't know what makes or doesn't make conflict of interest. Actually, we regularly monitor medical advertisements in Latvia, advertisements of non-prescription medicines. And several years ago, when we started to do it, there was one problem. Medical doctors very often participated in advertisements of non-prescription drugs. Is it a problem? So there is we have so-called morning programs mostly the audience are seniors, like TV shops or lifestyle programs. And very often these programs include advertisements for non-prescription medicines and food supplements. It's not a standard advertisement, it's longer. There is a doctor in the study, you know what I mean, I think. There's a doctor, maybe there's a popular person in the study, maybe a pharmacist, and they discuss about one particular non-prescription medicine and how good it is, should it be used, etc. Is it okay if medical doctors participate in this kind of programs? Is it legal? Is it legal in Lithuania? If somebody invites medical doctor to a morning program to advertise non-prescription medicine, is it legal? Not sure, you don't know.
But I remember at the group shows on the weekend, in the morning.
It's on work days usually, by the way. Oh, I think you are students, you don't know, but ask your grandma.
I mean, we had.
Okay.
Shows, but
It's more like TV shop, something. It's a very strange kind of programs. It's mainly advertising very different products, including medicines. But okay, the problem is that you don't know, and that's the biggest problem. It's illegal in all European Union to participate for medical professionals or pharmacists to participate in advertisements of medicines, on non-prescription medicines. And I think the biggest problem is that you don't know, that nobody tells you. And we discovered that many of those doctors who participate, they don't know. They just don't know. And that's problem of I don't know, education, of information, etc., etc. Do you understand why there is such a requirement not to participate in non-prescription? Why? What's the reason?
Well, the patients tend to look more when they see the doctor speaking.
Because they trust the doctor. And if they see a very popular doctor sitting there and saying that this drug is good, they trust the doctor, sure, absolutely. And that's why it's unethical for medical professionals to advertise one particular medicine. Because a doctor should prescribe medicines according to needs of particular patient. Because well-being of individual patient is your aim, not well-being of pharmaceutical company. And it's misusing of authority of doctor and trust in doctors to use them in advertisements. And again, I say the problem is that medical doctors and students, they don't even very often know that it's illegal to participate in these programs. And they are, I think there are also many other fields or problems where you just, or medical students or medical doctors just, they don't imagine what kind of problems might collaboration with industry raise. Do you believe that industry influences prescription habits of doctors? Right. Do they influence you? No. Yeah, but I would say that if you have met them here, or if you have met brand names, if you have a pen with a brand name, it already influences you. And that's why policies are so important. That's why universities should care that students are exposed to influence of pharmaceutical companies as late as possible. And you are also responsible for policies of your university.
Because I think, I'm not sure whether you're aware, but that's actually a question question of the quality of your education, because if your professors are, and in Latvia very many professors are in close relationships with the industry, well, they are receiving, you know, first of all, those sponsorships to go to congresses and conferences, then they are friends with sales reps, etc., etc. They are receiving the key opinion leaders, and I'm sure that that's the same here in Lithuania. They are receiving fees for consultations, etc. So if they are in close relationship with the industry and they are your professors, that's actually a question of what quality of education you are getting, because
it's about bias, actually, bias in information.
That's why it's important. It's not that we are so critical about the industry because we are anti-industry as such. Of course we are not, but it's very important to be aware that it might influence the quality of the education you are getting.
You don't have many reactions, and that's. Do you have any kind of comments to all this long story? But the other question is, why are drugs so expensive? It's a topic for a different lecture, but one of the problems is that industry includes in the price of medicines R&D expenses, but research and development. But it's not clear what these R&D expenses means very often, and very often R&D expenses includes marketing, which means that patients are paying for advertisements. Patients are paying for conferences where doctors go. Because that money given to doctors, it comes from somewhere. And actually it's paid by patients. And that's where some ethical problems also start. Also, industry is fantastic and very good, and new drugs, it's also very good, and new drugs should be developed. But what we do in our organization, and Health Action International works on that a lot, it's about influencing the general policy in European Union and globally to change the models of drug development. It means to change the patent system, maybe. Why the new hepatitis C drug is so expensive? You know what I mean? Yeah, it's extremely expensive. Even very rich Western countries have a big burden on their healthcare systems because of this new drug expenses. The question is why it costs per 1 gram more than diamonds. That's true. Why it's so expensive? Should it be patented? Maybe we should put more public money into research and development to let new drugs go without patents. There are several new documents, like European Parliament issued a new report recently, which was about all the problems in pharmaceutical industry and the possibilities to change the models. Also, United Nations high-level panel of access to medicines end of last year issued a very huge document about all the problems. There are a lot of problems in the world in access to medicines, and something should be changed, because medicines are not common or not just things. They save lives, and there are many ethical problems in how to develop them in the right way. And once more, the money which is used for promotion to doctors, it comes from patients. Any other comments?
I was thinking about when you walk past the university, there is a table on the wall that a pharma company has contributed to the reconstruction of the university, and you do not know how to feel about this because on one way it's contributing to our education, better buildings, better research, and so on. And on the other hand, they didn't start thinking about how we prescribe drugs. So should we feel bad about this, or should we be glad that they're funding our university development? I'm not sure how to feel about that.
Yeah, and I would say that development of policy means to clear up what we do think about these things. Maybe your university may develop a policy saying we can collaborate with industry in certain ways, but we don't collaborate in those in other ways. And it's better to be sure how what we think about particular things than not to be sure. And that's why American Medical Student Association developed these criteria. And you saw they are very detailed. They say what American Medical Student Association thinks about this. I don't know. So pharmaceutical industry pays for new building.
How much?
How
And
much?
what do they want in return, I wonder? Because as Signe already said, that pharmaceutical industry is not giving any money away just like that, just for charity. What is it that they want in return?
Yeah, but it's about open discussion. What is and what is not acceptable for us in our university? Because policies should, effective policies should come from people here in the university. And maybe at this moment, at this time, you will have certain principles. Maybe you will change them in 10 years in the future. But the main thing is to be clear. What do we think about this? Yeah, and then you will not have questions about this. Yeah.
What would be the model that you would be satisfied with when talking about the relationship between the physician and the pharmaceutical industry? Should it be more regulated or
transparent?
What do you mean by more transparent?
I mean transparent. In my view, it's very important. I think Vita agrees with me. Transparent in that sense that every member of society can see how much industry pays to the doctor, because it's like declaration of conflict of interest. Declaration of possible conflict of interest doesn't mean that it exists really, but it's transparency. Second thing, what is ideal? I would say that pharmaceutical representatives should not visit individual doctors. However, I didn't include in this presentation, but it also goes into history. These persons who come to your office, there are more modern technologies pharmaceutical industry uses. For example, through smartphone apps. They advertise through smartphone apps, and they are also very good apps doctors use to find certain medicines. But these apps collect information about your preferences, what do you prescribe, what do you do, and send back to pharmaceutical industry, for example. So it becomes more and more complicated. I would say that, for example, doctors must be informed if there is an app informed, sponsored by pharmaceutical industry, it must be very clear what they get back from that app. Yeah? I don't know. Ideal model.
I would be more radical than Signe. I would say that my ideal model would be that doctors do not cooperate with pharmaceutical industry at all.
I try to be realistic. I try to be realistic.
Like what? I mean, in what terms are you thinking? Like, what are the forms that you are having in your mind? Like, for instance,
going for dinner, is it? Yeah.
Or seeing sales reps? Like, because there are so many forms you can.
Well, that's an open question.
Yeah, I see.
I have a little bit of a follow-up, maybe. Talking about transparency and consumers, do patients show enough initiative? And if they actually care about this conflict of interest. For example, when you have this dollars for bucks page, do patients use that? And what can a patient change when, for example, he...
A doctor. He can change a doctor.
Does that happen?
That's interesting research question, by the way. I don't know. I don't know such research studies whether how it influences and does it change something. But because I can see your thought behind this comment. Many doctors say that public will not understand the amount of money paid to doctors. They are not competent to understand why it's so. I don't know. I would say that I myself, as a society member, I have a right to know how industry influences doctors. Because remember, it's all about influence. And if it's about influence, I would like to see how lobbying, for example. Our Ministry of Health recently introduced some policy for lobbying. But, and it says that it should be transparent who comes to Ministry of Health to lobby something.
It's not working.
It's okay, but they started, they introduced. Before that, there were people working at the ministry. They said there are members, there are representatives of industry almost living at the Ministry of Health. They are being there. They are always there. They are paid for speaking with ministry workers and influencing, lobbying. What happens in? I think that's not normal. It must be very transparent, because of course there are different levels. There is this individual level where is doctor and representative of company, but there are higher levels, ministry and also again. Representatives of companies, and they go to the ministry, for example, to influence choose of drugs for compensation system, or introduction of registration of new drugs, or I don't know, many decisions. And sometimes it goes on a very high level, really. There is one example, maybe you are too young to understand the message of the example, but at one time in Latvia, when it was about compensation for osteoporosis drugs, to Latvia there came Madeleine Albright, but maybe you don't know who she is.
She used to be the state secretary
of the United States. Yeah, very famous person. She came to Latvia to lobby for compensation for osteoporosis drugs at that time. So you can go up and up and up in many levels. Yeah, you can start with doctors in their offices, but you can go to the level where former Secretary of the United States flies to Latvia to influence a decision about particular groups of drug in interest of particular American company.
Spend money on something. There's a particular amount of money they have, and they will spend it. It doesn't matter where. And of course, the patient is the most important.
Sure.
As a patient, like, of course, you want to have medicine, and you don't want the influence, like our life, on the other hand. This is a discussion. This is not. I'm not 100% blaming them. This is my opinion. But on the other hand, companies lose profits, and I think a lot of workers could also lose profit if we ideal as
I like your comment because it's a real comment. We come to the phase in the discussion where you start to tell what do you think. That's great. But you mean business is business in some sense.
Yeah, and it's in every field of life.
Yeah, but
I understand health can't be
or can.
on the market.
Yeah, but the question is, are medicines very specific type of product?
Yeah.
Should there be different rules than the same was about some kind of in some case about Coca-Cola. Also, some very important person from US came to Latvia to lobby about Coca-Cola and something. Okay, I don't care a lot about so much about that. Yeah, but when somebody comes to influence decisions about medicines, I do care. Because for me, medicines are a very specific group of and there should be much higher level of ethical regulation than for other groups. I don't know. You can not agree with me, but
Yeah, of course, for example, the same example as Saltus
yeah,
hepatitis C.
yeah,
You are ill, having chronic hepatitis for 20, 30 years, and as a member in the summer school, you said all the treatment course prices from 40 to 60,000 euros. It depends on the country.
This year it's cheaper already.
Yeah, of course, it's cheaper, years. But I think liver transplantation is more expensive because you have usually cirrhosis or liver cancer after 20 years.
Yeah.
So you definitely need transplantation and costs more, I think, than how treatment.
But the question is, should industry be transparent about how they build the price of medicine? That's another question. I would say yes. And if we see how they build the price, you can find, I don't know, I tweeted recently last week, there is a calculator, you can see a number of profit for the same drug, hepatitis C drug, and it raises constantly. The numbers go round and round all the time, and the sum is right now, I don't know that.
I think it's several hundred
Billions, not millions, billions dollars already. And on the other side, there are people dying from hepatitis C.
people who have died.
Yeah, who have died, who cannot afford, because they cannot afford this medicine. And the profit is huge, enormous. And the ethical question is, should it be so enormous? Because people are dying, they cannot afford the medicine.
Because we agree that the industry has to make profit. There is no doubt about that. But the question is, I think, about the greed, the level of the greed we are talking about, especially when we are talking about the new innovative medicines, like the bingo medicines, which are actually like zero last year. I think I wanted to specify that the pie that Signe showed and the Prescrire rating, it's only related to the French market. But basically, French market is more or less, the market of the European Union, because these are the researchers of the French market. So that's specifically of the French market, but it's pretty much EU.
Or another question I can imagine, imagine these Me Too drugs, or nothing special. They advertise them very, very heavily. There is a lot of money put in advertising these drugs, because they must be advertising, otherwise nobody will.
If new,
yeah.
As if new, they are more expensive as a rule, but if we compare the therapeutic advantage with the drugs that are already in the market, there is almost no.
Yeah, so imagine, is it ethically acceptable to promote these Me Too drugs so heavily, and patients pay for promotion at the end? And is it ethically to push them into the market? How far?
But actually, it's a general consensus among manufacturers and doctors, and everybody knows that all drugs manufactured is non-superiority. Like, you can make discover a new drug, for example, which don't have more efficiency than other drugs, but maybe it has less
Side effects. It depends, but then it wouldn't be in this group Me Too drugs. If there are less side effects, it will be advantage of already. Now, in very many cases, there is no advantage. There is only new advertisement. Should we pay for that? I don't know. At least, should this advertisement influence you? That's also a question. I would say no. You should be strong and not let at least Me Too drug advertisements influence you. But for that you need knowledge to recognize that it's Me Too drug. Courage, because it's very, very easy to follow the mainstream, and modesty, because not to accept gifts from industry means to be more modest. But modesty is virtue, at least in ancient Greek. Virtue means, do you know what virtue is? Virtue. Tas ir tikums, bet tas ir virtue. Virtue, yeah. Modesty is one of the ancient Greek virtues. It's good to be modest, morally good. That's the message. And the three other virtues of ancient Greek was wisdom. It is good to be wise. That's true, isn't it? It's good to be modest. It's good to be brave. And the fourth was it's good to be just. And I would say that these put forward by Aristotle and Plato are still in force for a good doctor. Modest, wise. Okay, do you have any other comments? Questions? Plans for activities? Vita had just one thing. Vita had this book from just to show you.
Our mother organization is Health Action International. They have Carlos, I think you have seen this, but there is this is specially made for students. It's called Fact or Fiction: What healthcare professionals need to know about pharmaceutical marketing in the European Union. It's made by Health Action International, and it's available on the web for free, so you can download it. It's quite nice and informative. So just fact or fiction.
You can study by yourself and educate your classmates.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that this problem with doctors being in close relationships with pharmaceutical industry, it's not just a problem here in Lithuania or Latvia, it's global. Also in the United States, where the doctors are, as you know, millionaires, almost all of them, or they are very well paid there. In the United States, the doctors are the most wealthy people of all. And they also are doing this, so it's not really the question of low salaries or something. It's a question about something else. Perhaps you can help us figure out what it is when you become doctors, but it's not really a question of low salaries. That we admit that is a problem in Latvia and Lithuania and also in Estonia, but that's I think that's about something else. And we know that there are doctors whose principle is I don't cooperate with industry at all. So there is a way, there is a stance that you can take if you want. So it's not that, but of course you be sure that there will be a peer pressure and like questions, why are you doing this? But it's possible. So it's basically your choice. So that's just I wanted to add as a radical person. Okay.
I don't think we have any questions.
I think if somebody of you have individual questions, because sometimes people don't want to speak up in the public, you can just come and ask, and we can discuss in case you have something to say. Gifts.
Yes, gifts. Now you're doing things for us. I'm kidding. So really thanks for you, Signe and Vika, of course, for coming here. I think now we just broaden our outlook to this problem, and I think it's not over, not the end. We will face this problem like in the bigger,
It's up to you.
Yes, of course, and we'll be those who will, implement rules or do not. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So it was my pleasure.